This is First Words, the whiteboard session. I want to give a special shout out to James. Thank you so much for letting us take a look at your work. Let's see what the poem is doing now. Now, as we approach the piece, I'm handling it the way an editor would, as if you were just sending in a submission. I'm looking at it blind. I have no experience with the poem, so this is kind of just a first reaction, so that way you can get an idea of what does a reader encounter the first time they see the piece. Acting by James Cappy. Desperately, we search for fool's gold. In shallow graves we dug ourselves. We chased dreams dreamt by others, see through their eyes as closed as their mind. We get taught by those who teach what they were taught not to believe, because it is what they were taught to do. We strive to understand who we have been molded into, while wearing shoes that do not fit, but acting as if they do. So when I'm looking at poems, the first areas that I'm really considering is I'm paying attention to the title, I'm paying attention to the first line, I'm paying attention to the last line. One other thing I'm doing is I'm giving it the eye test. So when I look at the piece visually, what do I see going on? So we got a couplet, got a quatrain, and then got this 5-line stanza. Okay, so there's no real right or wrong answer here, but something structurally you want to be asking yourself, what does that suggest if we start off with couplets and then we end up with a 4 and then a 5-line stanza? Why did we break? How does that suggest some change happening, going from consistency down to something that is more difficult to predict, longer, boxier, some other things that we're seeing too? We start off with these really long lines, and we're finishing with these stanzas that have some much shorter lines, including all of these here. So this is in very stark contrast to how we open, right? When we open, we have these couplets that are long lines that are almost going margins, and then that's just not happening in the second half. So again, we're going to be asking ourselves structurally, how is this fitting what the poem is suggesting or what the poem wants to do? Looking at the title. One-word titles can be tricky because they don't, if you just see the title by itself, it's hard to know exactly what's going to be happening in the poem. It's hard to convey the emotion or the emotional change that the poem wants to put me in. It's hard to convey background information. And that's not to say a title needs to even do all those things. But when I see this title of acting, I'm not entirely sure yet how to feel. The word acting would suggest that we're going to be talking about something that maybe is false, or we're talking about something that isn't entirely true, like actors, like you're playing a role. But I also don't know who's doing it. Is it going to be the speaker? Is it going to be the community they're with? Are we viewing this playing as something negative? I think in general it conveys something, I don't want to say sinister, but it's giving the suggestion of layers, like there may be something going on that's beneath the surface that we may or may not be entirely aware of, but also that maybe we don't trust because we detect that there's more to it than what's actually happening. Also, the ing would suggest either it's the action itself or it's something that is ongoing. This is an experience that the speaker is still encountering in the present moment, potentially. Desperately we search for fool's gold. A couple things here. So we're starting off immediately with an emotional word. So we're establishing tone. We're not just searching, we're doing it desperately. So then the question becomes, why And this isn't necessarily something you have to answer, it's just from a reader's perspective. Why are we being desperate about this? What is making this such a crucial, kind of frantic search? And in fact, it's not just a search for gold, it's a search for fool's gold. It's interesting too, because there's an awareness here, right? The speaker is aware that what they're searching for is fool's gold. It's not real gold. Otherwise, the speaker would have said we're searching for gold and believed it. So this is showing awareness on the part of the speaker, which also, for me, from a time perspective, can be interesting because we're written in the present. But there's this idea, if we're searching for fool's gold, maybe it's almost like we're using the present, but we're actually kind of putting ourselves in a past moment and kind of sending ourselves backwards in time. And so we're kind of transporting us there. So I'm kind of wondering, is it an actual present or is it kind of a recollection? I don't know if this is the real present or is it something that we're just kind of sending ourselves back into a past when we didn't actually realize this was fool's gold. And then at some point we did, and now we're looking back at that time. We're thinking like, oh, how naive or something like that. So desperately we search for fool's gold. There's also the assumption too that fool's gold, we're probably not really searching for fool's gold, but what does the fool's gold represent? Is it actual fool's gold? Or is this actually something else? I'm not entirely sure just yet. The title doesn't help me out yet, so I don't know. In shallow graves we dug ourselves. So it's interesting with the shallow graves because I don't know, was the fool's gold put into there by ourselves? Or was that something that someone else added? There does seem to be some sort of complicit or sense that we had some agency in this. With the, we dug ourselves, we dug these graves, additional things that we intentionally did it shallow. There's a lot of intentionality being suggested here. We didn't want to make it too deep, maybe because we knew that this was going to happen again. I'm not sure. Interesting too that we're also using a lot of we's. So we versus I. A lot of times in poems, poets are using we when the we doesn't really mean anything but I, speaking about themselves. But on the other hand, this also is suggesting a sort of communal nature, maybe even cyclical to a degree. Okay. So desperately we search for fool's gold in shallow graves we dug ourselves. So it's this, you have these kind of weird irony, like we're searching for something that we ourselves may have buried intentionally, but also buried intentionally in a way that we could return to it later. So we have a lot of potentials for kind of ironies here. We're hiding something that we intend to get back to, and we know the location of. We chase dreams dreamt by others. So now we have this differentiation between the we, like we said earlier, potentially the speaker, and others. So the we is not necessarily we, every single person in the world. No, this is a select group of people because there's a we, but then there's also an other. And these others, what do these others do? These others have their own dreams. We don't have dreams. We chase them. So we're going after something. In addition to that, dreams are something, they're illusions, they're not real, right? But we're still going after them. So we're going after things that aren't even real, but these aren't real things that have been created by others. We chase dreams dreamt by others, see through their eyes, as closed as their mind. The period is making this a little bit complicated grammatically. This could be we as the subject, or because we're no longer, because we have this separation with the period, what this could also be is it could be a command. This could be an imperative. you're telling me, you're telling the reader to see through their eyes as closed as their mind. Both interpretations seem to work based on how I'm reading it right now. I don't know which one I'm supposed to be led to exactly. We get taught by those who teach what they were taught. So we're starting to see these kind of repetitions, right? We chase dreams dreamt by others. We get taught, we teach what they were taught. So we're seeing like they do this as they were done, they did this as they were this, and things like that. So we get taught by those who teach what they were taught. Something that is happening is now, we've seen a lot of agency to this point, right? The we do the searching. We did the digging. We do the chasing. But now this is passive. So suddenly we've switched. This is also the stanza that has switched structurally. So we've had some agency. We may not have necessarily liked the situation. I don't know what the tone is. It seems to not favorably view that situation. But now, here we're immediately switching to this passive. It happens to us. And now who has the agency? They do. These others, those who teach what they were taught. Who get taught by those who teach what they were taught not to believe. Okay, so interesting line break. So what they were taught not to believe. So they teach us, or they teach the we, things that they themselves were taught not to believe. Now, we don't know they were taught not to believe it. We don't know, do they not believe it? Because just because you were taught not to believe it doesn't mean that you agree or not. So I'm not entirely sure if they believe it. So we were taught not to believe it, but do they actually believe it? But that may not even be an important part of the argument, because it is what they were taught to do. So there's this kind of weird mix of agency and control versus a lack of agency and a lack of control. These things are kind of at odds. They do something, so they have control, they do it, but why are they doing it? It seems like they can't control their motivations. Which can raise the question, do they actually have control? So in a way, these they, which I'm assuming are the same as the others up here, are very similar to the we's in that there's kind of, we're doing things, we have some control, but at the same time we don't have control. We strive to understand who we have been molded into while wearing shoes that do not fit but acting as if we do. So interesting in this final stanza, the they, the those, and the others, what happens? They're gone. They completely disappear. The only thing we're left with is the we. The they in the last stanza becomes shoes. Okay. We strive to understand who we have been molded into. So in this case, there is some agency, but again, it's complicated. We strive to understand, which also suggests a lack of it as well. We strive to understand, which also suggests we don't understand. Who we have been molded into, once more, we're in very passive language. While wearing shoes that do not fit, but acting as if they do. Wearing shoes, this seems to be almost like, kind of like the cliche image, like, you know, like put yourself in their shoes or something like that, like the shoes representing you're doing what other people are doing, you're taking on their positions and things like that. While wearing shoes that do not fit. So these shoes, you can almost interpret this as the others in a way, I feel, but acting as if they do. But it can also be literal shoes. Okay, so pretending that the shoes fit you. Why? Though the one thing is I don't know acting as if they do. What's the motivation here? Why we're doing this? We strive to understand who we've been molded into, but we don't. Why do we want to understand who we've been molded into? Wearing shoes that don't fit but acting as if they do. Why are we acting? I don't see the motive. Okay, so this is just like a real quick line by line breakdown about things that I'm noticing on a first read. Let's go back to talk about some of those points I mentioned at the beginning. So when an editor is looking at a poem, the places where they begin are typically the title, first line, last line. I mentioned a lot about the title, some potential strengths, some potential areas of concern with a one-word title. Desperately we search for fool's gold. I like that we have an emotional word here, but I don't know entirely the intention of why are we so desperate about it? And I'm not sure if the poem really answers that. So we're suggesting a tone, we're suggesting an emotion, but I'm not sure why that emotion is the one that we're sticking with. The ending, again, I have more questions about why are we acting as if they do. I don't entirely get the intention behind that either. The poem in a lot of ways feels kind of cryptic to me, and in the sense that we don't really know who the speaker is. We don't know the motivations for a lot of the things that are happening. We don't know who are the others. Like, it feels like we're really kind of like talking around the thing instead of like directly saying the thing that caused this. And that's kind of something I'm a bit curious about. There's also not necessarily a lot in the poem that is grounding the reader, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But for instance, the fool's gold, a concrete image, but when you read the poem, you get the interpretation we're not really talking about fool's gold, right? This isn't literally that. Same thing like the shallow graves. This feels like it's a metaphor. For what exactly? We chase dreams dreamt by others. What exactly are the dreams? See through their eyes, as closed as their minds. So we're saying they have a closed mind. To what? We're just not really ever going deeper. We get taught by those who teach what they were taught not to believe. What are we talking about? What concept? What were they taught? Then the last stanza, I always get curious about characters in poems, especially characters that appear and then characters that disappear. And so when I look at this, where have they gone? Where are these others? Why are they disappearing in this last stanza? And this also goes back to structure too. Our first two, why we have these stanzas, these couplets that are very regular, that I mentioned earlier. I don't entirely know why we're breaking. Some of the patterns that I see shifting here are, we've almost put the people doing the teaching, the who, the they, we're almost putting them in a similar situation as the we, in the sense of that kind of control, lack of control balance that's kind of happening. So that structure is one thing that I think could justify that switch. And I think that could work because, so originally you had the couplets, and then the couplets created that separation between the we and the there, the others. And then in this 4-line stanza, you're joining everyone together. So in that sense, I could see that working. The 5-line stanza, I would have to kind of think about more about what that's going on. But I guess the big thing for me is I don't entirely know how to feel in this poem. We start with strong emotion with the desperately, and then that emotion immediately becomes, we're almost kind of given like these platitudes, but I don't really know how to feel. Like, I'm guessing I'm supposed to feel negative about them, but I don't know why exactly. So my challenge would be, how am I supposed to feel about this situation? And what words in the poem are confirming that or suggesting that? The other thing, big concept in a poem, is your turn or your volta. It's the shift. It's the moment in a poem where everything changes. You start to realize that the speaker becomes different, or the poem becomes different in some way. The poem, though, is really kind of consistently talking about, we're searching for fool's gold, we chase dreams, we're getting taught this stuff, we strive to understand, we're acting as if, but like, where's the shift? There's no real shift. We're kind of, in some ways, just repeating kind of concepts over and over again. And so for this poem, I think, to go to the next level, something that I would really suggest doing is trying to ask myself, where is the turn? Where is the shift occurring? What are your thoughts on this poem? What are some things that I didn't discuss, or things that you think I missed, or maybe you have some disagreements, or things you agree with? Let us know what your thoughts on this poem are. Thanks to James for letting us check this piece.